Claire woke up 1 minute before her alarm went off. She had done this for years, long enough that she stopped questioning it the way you stop questioning any habit that becomes part of your body. 6:04 in the morning. She lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling, listening to Daniel breathe on the other side of the bed. His back was to her. There was a strip of mattress between them that neither of them had crossed in a long time. She got up without making noise. The floors in their Northwest Hills condo were hardwood and she knew every board that creaked. The bathroom mirror gave her back a woman who looked exactly as tired as she felt, 38 years old, fine lines at the corners of her eyes. The stillness in the face of someone who has learned to keep most of what she is thinking to herself. She washed her face, put on a little makeup, and did not linger. The kitchen was spotless. It always was. Claire ran the espresso machine, the same one she and Daniel had bought 10 years ago, back when they had stood in the appliance store arguing about whether it was too expensive. And she had laughed so hard at his impression of the salesman that a woman in the next aisle turned to look. She did not think about that this morning. She poured her coffee and stood at the window while the city below them was still mostly dark. Daniel came out at 6:30. He was wearing a shirt she did not recognize, pale blue nude, the kind of shirt you buy when you want someone to notice you are wearing it. He smelled faintly of something she could not place. Not his usual cologne. "Have you seen my gray tie?" he said, already looking at his phone. "The one with the stripe." "Second shelf, left side of the closet," Claire said. She did not turn around. "He found it." She heard him moving through the bedroom, then back into the kitchen, the sound of him checking his phone again, the small rituals of a man in a hurry to be somewhere. "I will be late tonight," he said. "Supplier meeting." "Do not wait up." "You have had a lot of those lately," Claire said. She kept her voice easy. His fingers went still over the screen for just a second. "Business is picking up," he said a little too quickly. "You know how it is." She nodded. He kissed her once on the top of the head, the kind of kiss that does not require eye contact, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut. Claire stood at the counter with her coffee going cold and the apartment very quiet around her. And she thought 15 years is long enough to know the difference between a man who is busy and a man who is somewhere else entirely. She just had not let herself say it out loud yet. She got home at 7:15 to an empty apartment and a note stuck to the bathroom mirror. Daniel's handwriting hurried, "Do not wait up." She peeled it off the glass and set it on the counter without reading it twice. His jacket was on the entryway table. He had left in a hurry, apparently. Claire hung her own coat and then stood there for a moment looking at his. She was not sure what made her reach into the pocket. She would think about that later, whether it was instinct or exhaustion or just the way a person moves when they have been quietly bracing for something without admitting it. Her fingers found a dry cleaning slip, his car keys, and a folded receipt from the jewelry boutique on Northwest 23rd. She carried it to the kitchen window and read it under the light. A sapphire necklace. The price was enough to make her breath catch. The date on the receipt was yesterday. She stood there for a long time. Their anniversary had been a month ago. He had brought home flowers, a nice enough bouquet, the kind that said "I remembered" without saying much else. Her birthday was 3 months away. Christmas was nowhere near. She could not remember the last time he had bought her anything with a receipt that looked like this one. She had been a cardiologist for over a decade. She knew what it looked like when something stopped beating the way it should. That night she lay in the dark and listened. Every set of headlights that swept across the ceiling made her chest tighten. He came in just after 3 in the morning, moving carefully through the bedroom the way people do when they are hoping not to be asked anything. He smelled of whiskey and something floral, sweet and heavy, not her perfume. He settled onto his side of the bed without touching her, without speaking, with the deliberate quiet of a man who needed his wife to stay asleep. That carefulness was its own kind of answer. The next morning she was at St. Marcus Medical Center by 7. She put on her white coat in the locker room, straightened her badge, and became Dr. Holt, and there was genuine relief in that, the way there always was. In this building, her hands were steady and her instructions were followed, and the work in front of her was real. She moved through morning rounds with the focused efficiency her residents had learned to keep up with or get out of the way of. Rachel found her in the hallway between the second and third patient. "You look terrible," Rachel said, handing her a coffee. Rachel had known her long enough to skip the polite version. "Migraine," Claire said. "Mostly gone." Rachel looked at her the way she looked at charts that did not quite add up. "Daniel, okay, he is fine." "Busy." Rachel let it go, but not completely. Claire could feel her holding onto it as they walked. The call from Margaret came at 11 while Claire was at the nurse's station reviewing labs. She stepped into the hallway to take it. Margaret asked after Daniel in that fond and pointed way she had, and then mentioned not for the first time that she was not getting any younger, and that it would mean the world to her while she still had her health. Claire said all the right things. She kept her voice warm and unhurried. In her other hand, folded into her palm, was the receipt from Northwest 23rd. She held it the entire conversation without looking at it once. She already knew every number on it by heart. 2 days later, Claire called the charge nurse at Street Marcus and said she had a migraine. It was the first sick day she had taken in almost 2 years. The nurse sounded surprised and told her to rest. Claire said she would. She was parked across from Holt Medical Systems by 9 o'clock. The building was glass and concrete, a clean corporate face on the edge of the Pearl District, expensive looking without advertising it. Claire had driven past it hundreds of times. She had attended the ribbon cutting when Daniel opened this location 3 years ago, standing beside him in heels while someone took photographs. She sat in her car now with the engine off and a cup of gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder, and she watched the front entrance the way she watched monitors during a complicated procedure. Steadily, without rushing, waiting for the number that would tell her what she already suspected. Daniel arrived at 9:40 in his silver BMW. He parked in the spot nearest the door, the one with the small placard that said reserved CEO, and got out with his jacket already on, phone to his ear. A half smile on his face that she recognized and did not. She knew that smile. She had just not seen it in a long time, and certainly not directed at her. He moved across the parking lot with his shoulders back and his stride unhurried, a man arriving somewhere he was glad to be. She sat with that for a while. At noon the glass door opened and he walked out with a woman Claire had never seen before. Tall, dark-haired, red coat put together in a way that takes time in the morning. They crossed the parking lot side by side, not touching but close in a way that had nothing to do with professional courtesy. The woman said something, and Daniel laughed, really laughed, head tilting back, and then his hand went briefly to the small of her back as they reached his car. A small gesture. Automatic. The kind you make when you have stopped thinking about whether anyone is watching. They drove away. Claire stayed where she was. There is a kind of pain that comes not from what you see but from how long you realize you have already known. She had not needed to come here to find out. Some part of her had known since the receipt, maybe before. But there is a difference between knowing and watching it happen 30 feet away on a Tuesday in November, and she let herself feel that difference for exactly as long as it took to pick up her phone. Rachel answered on the second ring. Claire could hear the hospital behind her monitors, a PA announcement, the low-level noise of the floor. "I need to ask you something," Claire said. "About Daniel's company. There is a woman in his PR department. Tall, dark hair, late 20s. Do you know who she is?" A pause. "Natalie Reeves," Rachel said. Her voice had gone careful. "She has been there about 4 months. Came in as PR director, which honestly nobody really understood. Her background did not justify the title. Not even close." Another pause. "Claire, what is going on?" "I am not sure yet," Claire said. "I need to understand the full picture before I do anything. Do not say anything to anyone." "Of course not." Rachel's voice was quiet now. "Are you okay?" Claire looked at the empty parking spot where Daniel's car had been. "I will call you later," she said and hung up. He came home that evening with white orchids. A full bunch of them, the expensive kind, the ones she had mentioned once years ago that she loved because they lasted. He held them out with a slight tilt of his head and a smile that was working a little too hard, and she recognized immediately what the flowers were for. Not a gesture of affection but of preemptive management, the offering of a man who needed his wife in a particular mood. She could smell Natalie's perfume on him. He had not showered before coming home. "I was thinking we could do dinner Saturday," he said, setting the orchids on the counter while she found a vase. "That Italian place on Northwest 23rd. Where we went for your birthday last year." He was touching his collar without seeming to know he was doing it. His eyes moved around the kitchen and did not settle on her face. "That sounds nice," Claire said. She meant it to sound neutral, and it came out warmer than that, which seemed to relieve him. She noted the relief. Saturday evening. The restaurant was exactly as she remembered it, dim lighting, good wine list, the kind of place that makes people feel like their lives are going well. Daniel ordered a bottle of Barolo and told the waiter it was a special occasion. He was attentive in the careful, slightly effortful way of a man performing a role he had let lapse. He asked about her patients. He remembered a story she had told him 2 weeks ago and followed up on it. At one point he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She let him. She smiled. She thought about a sapphire necklace on someone else's neck and said all the right things for 2.5 hours. He was doing this badly. She was doing it very well, and she was the only one at the table who understood why that gap existed. Monday morning he made eggs before she was fully dressed over easy the way she liked and set them on the counter without being asked. He was in a good mood. The weekend seemed to have settled something for him, resolved some internal account. He kissed her cheek on his way out and told her to have a good day. When the door closed, she stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she walked to the bathroom, sat down on the floor with her back against the cool tile of the tub and cried. It was not loud. It did not last long, 4 minutes, maybe 5. She was not crying about Natalie Reeves. She was crying about 15 years. About the espresso machine and the ribbon cutting and the version of this life she had believed in for a long time before she stopped. She did not fall apart. She just let herself feel the full weight of it once, and then she stood up, washed her face, and started thinking about what came next. Monday morning of the following week, Claire found Kayla on her lunch break at the coffee shop half a block from Holt Medical Systems. She had gotten Kayla's number from the company's public contact page, introduced herself by text as a colleague of Daniel's from a hospital charity board, and suggested they grab coffee sometime. Kayla had responded within the hour. Claire had half expected to work for the information, but it turned out Kayla had been sitting on her frustration for weeks. Ever since Natalie arrived and took the office next to Daniel's, the whole front desk dynamic had shifted. Kayla had gone from being the person Daniel relied on to being someone he walked past. She did not need much encouragement to talk. They sat by the window with lattes and Kayla talked. Claire asked careful questions and mostly listened. Natalie Reeves had been given the office directly next to Daniel's. A connecting door had been installed about 3 weeks after she started, which Kayla described as supposedly for quick check-ins, with a tone that made clear nobody in the office believed that. The two of them kept unusual hours. There was something about an account. Kayla had overheard a conversation in the hallway, something about access being transferred, numbers she did not understand. But she had not thought much of it at the time because she was not a finance person. She said this cheerfully, finishing her latte. Claire thanked her, paid for both drinks, and walked back to her car with her hands steady and her mind already moving to the next conversation. Sandra Price's office was on the 3rd floor of an older building in the Pearl, the kind of place with an unreliable elevator and floors that announced you from 20 feet away. It smelled like old wood and strong coffee and the staleness of a room where serious conversations happened regularly. Sandra had been Claire's friend since they were 17, had gone through her own brutal divorce 8 years ago, and now handled family law and asset recovery with the focused energy of someone who understood the subject from both sides of the table. Claire laid everything out. The receipt, the parking lot, Kayla's account, the shell company she had found on Daniel's laptop 2 nights ago. His password had not changed since their wedding year. She had not mentioned this to him. Sandra spread the documents across her desk and read without interrupting. Then she pulled up the Oregon LLC registration Claire had brought. Holt Medical Systems, filed 11 years ago, registered owner Claire and Holt. A junior attorney had recommended it at founding. Daniel had called it a formality. Sandra explained the structure plainly. Claire held full ownership of the LLC. Daniel had been granted managing member status, which gave him authority to run day-to-day operations and sign vendor contracts. But any transfer of company assets or ownership interest required Claire's signature. He had the keys to the building, in other words, but not the deed, which made what he had been doing not restructuring but theft. Sandra pulled up the shell company next. Opened 3 months ago. Same month the affair started. She tapped the filing date. He has been routing money out through fraudulent vendor invoices, she said. Natalie's department is the conduit, but Natalie is signing off through the company's shared project management system, not from his personal files. The paper trail runs through official channels, which is actually worse for him. Her assessment was direct simultaneous civil fraud claim and divorce filing executed before Daniel could move more assets. She needed a week to prepare the filings. I want both filed before the dinner, Claire said. Sandra nodded. Friday morning, she said. Before he wakes up. Claire said, fine. Walking out of Sandra's building into the gray Pearl District afternoon, Claire felt something shift. For the first time in weeks, she did not feel like a woman being deceived. She felt like a doctor who finally had the full chart in front of her. 2 days later, on Thursday evening, she drove out to Gresham. Owen's property sat on 2 acres east of the city kennels, a small rescue operation he had built after leaving the army, a house that always smelled like dogs and would smoke. He met her on the porch and they sat with coffee while she told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which with Owen meant something. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his jaw set, his hands still around his mug in a way that was more controlled than relaxed. "Tell me where he lives," Owen said. "That is not what I need," Claire said. "I need you at a dinner. 2 Saturdays from now. You sit, you eat, you do not say a word unless I ask you to. Can you do that?" He looked at her for a long time. "And if he comes at you, then you stand up," she said. "That is all." He agreed reluctantly, in the way Owen agreed to things he thought were insufficiently direct. She drove back to Portland in the dark, and by the time she crossed back over the river, she had a lawyer, a plan, and her brother's word. The following Wednesday mid-afternoon, Dr. Ellison called Claire into his office at Street Marcus. His office was at the end of the cardiology wing, a corner room with a window that looked out over the hospital courtyard. He had worked in that room for 19 years, and it showed the shelves dense with journals and binders, photographs on the wall spanning decades. The whole place carrying the settled quality of a space where someone had done serious work for a long time. He closed the door, which told her this was not about a patient. He did not take long getting to it. He was retiring in 2 months. He had already spoken to the administration. He wanted to recommend her as division chief head of cardiology effective when he stepped down. He told her she was the strongest clinician in the department, that her instincts were sound and her judgment under pressure was the kind that could not be taught. Then he said something that stayed with her. He said that for most people, "do no harm" was a phrase they had memorized in school. For her it was observable. You could see it in how she made decisions. Claire thanked him and asked for a week to think it over. He said of course, but not too long. There were other names on the list. She nodded and shook his hand and walked back down the hallway to finish her afternoon. She sat in her car in the Street Marcus parking garage before driving home, the concrete around her dim and cold and quiet, and she let herself think, do no harm. The dinner was 10 days away. Sandra would file everything Friday morning. The plan was designed to expose what Daniel had done to the people who had trusted him, who had worked alongside him, who deserved to know, and to recover what was legally and rightfully hers. It was not designed to be cruel. But she sat with the question anyway. Because she was someone who sat with questions. Was there a version of this that constituted harm? Was putting a man's choices on a screen in front of his mother and his CFO and his oldest friends something she could square with the principle she had built her professional life around? She did not arrive at a clean answer. She was not sure one existed. What she knew was this: she had spent her career making hard calls in rooms where everything was on the line. She had learned to act on the best available evidence to protect the patient in front of her, and to accept that some decisions could not be made comfortable, only made. The only patient she had been failing to protect for longer than she wanted to admit was herself. She started the car and drove home, and by the time she crossed into Northwest Portland, she had made her peace with it. That Thursday night, just after 10, a text came in from an unknown number. Short and direct: "This is Natalie Reeves. I need to talk to you. Alone." Claire read it twice, set the phone face down on the nightstand, and lay in the dark for a while thinking about it. Daniel was asleep beside her. She listened to him breathe and considered the possibilities, that this was genuine, that it was a setup, that Natalie had found something that scared her, that Daniel had sent her as a way of getting ahead of whatever he suspected Claire was planning. In the morning she picked up the phone and typed back: Briar Coffee, Southeast Portland, Friday 3 o'clock. Come alone. Natalie was 15 minutes late. Claire was already at a corner table with a cup of black coffee and her coat still on when the door opened and a woman walked in who looked younger than she had from a parking lot across the street. No red coat today. Dark jeans, a plain sweater, no makeup that Claire could detect. No sapphire necklace. She looked like someone who had not slept well, which Claire recognized because she had been looking at that same face in her own mirror for 2 weeks. Natalie sat down across from her and did not bother with small talk. I know this is a strange thing to do, she said. I almost did not come. But you did, Claire said. I found records in the company's project management system, Natalie said, keeping her voice low. Vendor contracts, invoices, payments going out through my department. I signed off on some of them because he said it was standard restructuring routine stuff that needed her approval as department head. He never explained what I was actually approving. Last week I pulled the full history and she stopped. The numbers do not match any real vendors. It is not restructuring. It is not, Claire said. Natalie looked up. He told me your marriage was basically over, she said. That you had both known it for years. That when the time came, you would be reasonable about it. She paused. He said he had it handled. Claire kept her expression neutral. What made you contact me? Because I think he is planning to leave both of us with nothing, Natalie said. And I did not know who else to tell. Claire picked up her phone, pulled up the photographs she had taken in Sandra's office and set it on the table facing Natalie, the shell company registration. The invoice trails. The account transfers. Natalie leaned forward and went very still. You already knew, she said. For about a week, Claire said. My attorney filed this morning. Natalie sat back. The coffee machine hissed behind the counter. Someone near the door laughed at something. The ordinary sounds of a Friday afternoon in southeast Portland, indifferent to the two of them sitting in the corner working out what they were to each other. I am hosting a dinner tomorrow night, Claire said. His mother will be there. His CFO. Some people who have known both of us for years. I would like you to come. Natalie was quiet for a moment. In clearest Tarnafor, he will not be expecting that. No, Claire said. He will not. I will be there, Natalie said. Claire left money on the table for her untouched coffee and walked out into the gray afternoon. She had gone in prepared for a confrontation, and had gotten something she had not accounted for, not an enemy exactly but a witness. Someone else who had been handed a version of Daniel Holt that turned out not to be the whole truth. She walked to her car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Tomorrow night. She set the table herself that afternoon. The good silver, the white linen tablecloth they had received as a wedding gift and used maybe 4 times the tall candles in the brass holders Daniel's mother had given them one Christmas. From the wine rack she took the Burgundy they had been saving, a bottle a friend had brought back from France 2 years ago, set aside for the right occasion. She uncorked it and let it breathe on the counter. Then she changed into a black dress, put her hair up and stood in the kitchen for a moment looking at the room. It looked like a celebration. Guests arrived at 7. Margaret came first in her good coat and pulled Claire into a hug that lasted a second longer than usual. She held Claire at arm's length afterward and said quietly that she looked tired. Then her eyes moved to Daniel across the room and stayed there for just a moment, the look of a woman who had been paying attention to her son for months and had her own set of unanswered questions. Greg Calloway arrived with his wife, relaxed and easy, expecting a dinner party. He clapped Daniel on the shoulder and accepted a glass of wine. Owen came in without fanfare and found a chair near the edge of the room close to the hallway. He had worn a collared shirt. He sat with his hands on his knees and did not say much to anyone. Daniel moved through the room playing host, refilling glasses, making introductions, laughing at the right moments. But Claire could see him watching her. He had been watching her all week, trying to read something in her composure that would tell him what she was thinking. She had given him nothing. Natalie arrived last. Dark dress, no necklace, the color slightly gone from her face. Daniel saw her from across the room and went completely still. He started moving toward the door, but Claire was closer. She crossed the room and took Natalie's hand warmly, turning to face the gathered guests. So glad you could make it, she said clearly into the room. Everyone, this is Natalie. She works with Daniel. Several people smiled and nodded. Daniel stood where he had stopped 3 feet away and did not move. When everyone was seated, Claire remained standing. She picked up her glass and waited until the room quieted. To the truth, she said. She held Daniel's eyes when she said it. He set his glass down. She connected her laptop to the wall screen with the calm efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the steps. She told the room simply that she and Daniel were separating. Someone drew a sharp breath. A fork clicked against a plate. Margaret's hand moved to her chest. Claire advanced to the next slide. What followed was not a speech. It was documentation. Wire transfers out of Holt Medical Systems into a shell company opened 3 months ago. Vendor invoices processed through the PR department that corresponded to no actual services. An email chain in which Daniel discussed in plain language how to keep the movement of funds difficult to trace. Claire read none of it aloud. She let the room read it themselves. Then she said, "This is fraud. My attorney Sandra Price filed the civil claim this morning. Copies are already on record. The room fractured. Daniel shoved back from the table and his wine glass went over dark red blooming across the white linen spreading toward the edge. Greg Calloway had gone the color of old concrete staring at the screen with his own glass forgotten in his hand. Margaret turned to her son very slowly. She asked him in a voice so quiet it barely carried if it was true. Daniel said it was out of context. He said Claire did not understand how the business worked. His voice had climbed past composed into something thinner. He took a step toward her side of the table. Natalie stood up. She crossed the room and stopped beside Claire, not touching her, just standing there, and the gesture was simple and legible and landed on the room like a statement. I saw the records, she said to no one in particular. I am not going to pretend I did not. Daniel said her name like an accusation. Owen stood up. He did not speak, did not raise his hands. Just rose to his full height and positioned himself between Daniel and Claire with the stillness of someone who has done more difficult things than this and is prepared to do them again. Daniel stopped. The room emptied in pieces over the next 15 minutes. Some people left without speaking. Greg pulled Daniel aside in the hallway and Claire heard his voice low and controlled, asking questions that Daniel did not seem to have answers for. Owen stayed until he was the last one besides family, then squeezed Claire's shoulder once and went to wait on the landing. Margaret was the last to leave. She put on her coat slowly and then she turned and held Claire's face in both hands the way she had done once before a long time ago. When Claire had been in the hospital after the second procedure and Daniel had gone to get coffee and had not come back for 2 hours. I always considered you my daughter, Margaret said. Her voice was steady. That does not change tonight. She kissed Claire's cheek and walked out. The door closed. The candles were still burning. The wine had soaked into the tablecloth and dried to the color of rust. She had planned every detail of that evening. The one thing she had not planned for was how quiet the room would feel afterward. The guests were gone. The candles had burned low. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room looking at the wine-stained tablecloth and the blank wall where the screen had been, and then he looked at Claire. You destroyed everything I built, he said. I protected what was mine, she said. There is a difference. He told her she had humiliated him in front of people who mattered to him, that she had turned his own mother against him. That she had no idea what it had taken to build Holt Medical Systems into something real. Claire let him talk. She had expected this, the reframing, the injured architect surveying the wreckage of his own design and finding someone else to blame. When he slowed down, she told him calmly that Sandra had filed a civil fraud claim that morning. The evidence was already on record. She said this without emphasis, the way she delivered difficult information to patients clearly without cruelty, giving him time to understand what she was actually saying. Then she told him she was not going to pursue a criminal complaint on top of it. He stared at her. Why not? Because do no harm is not just something I practice at work, she said. And because what I filed this morning is enough to take back what is mine. I am not interested in destroying you on top of that. Something moved across his face then, not gratitude, not relief exactly, but the discomfort of a man who had been prepared for a fight and been handed a boundary instead. He was quiet for a moment. And then he said it. She would think later that he had been holding it the whole evening, waiting for the right crack to aim it at. He said that the marriage had fallen apart because she could not give him what he wanted, that some part of him had known for years they were building toward nothing. That maybe if things had been different, if she had been different, none of this would have happened. Claire stood very still. She felt the words land, felt exactly where they landed, and she looked at him for a long moment. That is a cruel thing to say, she said. And you know it. She walked to the front door and opened it. He left without saying anything else. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in April, Claire stood at the window of her new office at Street Marcus. The door behind her read Division Chief, Department of Cardiology. Outside, the hospital courtyard was fully green, the kind of green that only happens in Portland in spring when the rain finally means something. Holt Medical Systems had been restructured over the winter. Greg Calloway had proven steadier than she had expected, and most of what Daniel had moved had been recovered through the civil proceedings Sandra filed the Friday before the dinner. Daniel himself had left Portland in January. She had heard this from Owen, who had heard it from someone else, and she had noted it the way you note weather. Margaret came by that afternoon with tulips and sat in the chair across from Claire's desk and talked for a while about small things. Then she set her hands in her lap and said carefully that Daniel and Natalie had settled somewhere outside of Seattle. That Natalie was pregnant. Claire was quiet for a moment. She felt something move through her, not jealousy, not quite. It was older and more specific than that grief for the version of her life that had existed only in the planning, in the years of procedures and waiting rooms and the hope that keeps restarting itself until the day it does not. The image she had carried for so long of what their family was supposed to become occupied now by someone else. Then underneath that something she had not anticipated, a genuine wish that they got it right. That the child would be okay. That the thing she had wanted so badly and could not have would at least mean something good in someone else's hands. I hope they are well, she said, and meant enough of it that it did not feel like a performance. Margaret looked at her for a moment with the expression of a woman who understood exactly what that had cost to say. Then she reached across the desk and squeezed Claire's hand once, and they moved on to other things. That evening Claire walked home across the Burnside Bridge. The Willamette ran below her, wide and gray-green and unhurried, the last of the winter cold still in it, but moving now, no ice, just the river doing what rivers do. She stopped at the railing and stood there for a while. The city hummed on both banks. Somewhere behind her, a cyclist rang a bell. She had spent 15 years trying to hold something together that had been coming apart for years. Standing there above the river, she finally understood letting go was not the failure. Holding on past the truth was. The water moved. She watched it for another minute and then she walked the rest of the way home. If you were in Claire's position with everything documented and the civil claim already filed, would you have pushed for the criminal complaint on top of it? Or would you have made the same call she did? Tell me in the comments.